Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on our third episode of the Kildare GAA Youth Athletic Development webinar. This evening, we're going to be presenting on multi-directional speed and developing this in youth GAA athletes. So we've been working on this all week. This evening, David O'Neill and Michael Gillick are going to be presenting. David and Michael are two GPOs in Kildare, and they're working as part of this working group alongside myself and Kieran Sloan from Loud, developing this content. So we've been working away on all week. There's quite a bit in it, but we think that we've built out some very good content. So just following on from all the last presentations, we're trying to provide you with the information that we think you can use and that's practical. If we lose you at any stage, this is only one part of our support. So please drop me an email or a text or a phone call, and I can follow up on you on any area that you're not too sure of, myself or any of the lads. Throughout the webinar this evening, it'll be an open forum. So if you're unsure of any area that the lads are discussing, throw a question into the question box. If you hover over your screen, you're going to see that there's a text box where it says show conversation. If you throw your question in there, I'll be watching that for the evening, and I'll pose the question to the lads when we get a break in conversation. Again, the way we've ran the last two presentations, it'll be quite informal. So Dave and Mick will be having a chat, and they'll be presenting slides and interjecting on each other and finishing each other's sentences and the likes, which we find is very good. And then if there's any area I feel I could throw my tuppence worth in, I'll get in there as well. So that's enough of me chatting. I'm going to hand you over to the lads to give you a better introduction than I did, and we'll kick it on from there. So off you go, boys.
Yeah, cheers, Paul. Thanks. Just a quick, Mick Gillick, GPO in League Slip GAA in Kildare. Would have been involved with Maynooth University hurling teams over the last few years, and obviously a conditioning background. So yeah, look, excited to be involved in this project. So Dave, what about yourself?
Yeah, cheers Mick, cheers Paul, and thanks for the invite to come on and present here. I suppose I'm a GPO, as Paul has said, in the county. I'm still an active player with Round Towers. I've been the S&C coach for the Kildare under-20s and the minors over the past 4 years. And I'd have a bit of a special interest in this area, so I'm looking forward to delving in and chatting about it.
Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, so Paul, if we just move on to the introduction there. So guys, we're just going to have a little look this evening in obviously multi-directional speed, and as we go through the course of the webinar, we're going to discuss why we train multi-directional and what it actually is, and then once we've established why we train it, what it is, then we're going to hopefully break down how to actually train it in relation to the youth GAA player. So that's the aims of this evening. So yeah, so we can move on to the next slide there, Paul. So the first area of the webinar brings us to the why. So it's obviously important for us to understand why we're doing, why we're including into our training programs. So that's why we're starting off on the why. And on the first slide into the why, we have to reduce injury risk. So obviously with these sort of movements in our games of change of direction, they do pose, similarly to the speed presentation last week, they do pose injury risk factors, and we're kind of caught in a conundrum or a conflict of performance and injury. So we have to train it, but we need to prepare our athletes for the demands of the game. So the research has shown that following a balanced program of including proper technique and motor patterns, it helps along the way to reduce the injury risk in these movements. Have you got anything else to add there on the injuries there, Dave?
Yeah, so just a small bit there, Mick, on the deceleration aspect. Just one paper that was released there, within the last couple of years, it just highlights the impacts of deceleration, and it's an area that's involved in every change of direction and every multi-directional run. is a high force deceleration, and it's greater than 50% the force of an acceleration. So we're absorbing massive force in these decelerations and changes of direction. So essentially we have to train it if we're going to experience it in the game. And to create our robust athletes, our training needs to act as almost like a vaccine to proof our players so they're ready for the game.
Instead of shying away from it, we're preparing our players for it then. So exactly, yeah. And then onto our next slide then, guys, just onto the why, is obviously we have performance. So I'm sure everybody on the webinar this evening can and does appreciate the importance of our players being able to sidestep, evade, get out of trouble, get into space. It's an integral part of our game. And and then as you look at it then going forward, the research does show that when they compare elite and sub-elite, so let's say senior intercounty and senior club players, for example, or under 17 intercounty and Division 1 club players, that what separates the two generally is their ability to perform reactive agility tests and reactions to them stimulus. So therefore, the performance aspect of this area is of huge importance to us, and I'm sure we can all appreciate that. So just from the practicalities of the actual game and what we do on the pitch, and then when we dive a little bit deeper into it and we look at change of direction and reactive agility, it is the reactive agility component that really separates the players from elite to sub-elite levels. I think that's it on that one, Dave. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Like as you've said, the reactive component separates elite and non-elite, and it's just important to highlight that the non-elite there in our context is not a bad standard. It might be senior club to intercounty club or whatever it is. So it's still an important task to be able to change direction, and especially at the stage we're at with the youth GAA player, that's probably where we're going to make our most gains. Like as we're going to explain later, we'll almost train that reactive component through our games, and it's the more movement patterns that we need to focus on with the youth.
Yeah, exactly. So look, I guess there's no better way to paint a picture than to show a quick video. So the next just videos that we're going to play now is it just outlines what we're discussing here, and just hopefully they play for you. Just sit back and just appreciate the movement that's taking place over the course of these two videos now.
Are they working?
Yeah. So really watching here now and the movement. It's just unbelievable athleticism, and when you see it being performed to that level. And then just moving on to the next video as well. And we've actually used the same video as last week because it just has such good content. Like, look at this footwork here.
Beautiful step.
Yeah, like it just showcases the importance of our players to have the ability to perform these movements, and like to see it being performed at that elite level. Obviously, we're discussing the youth player now, but we all strive to perform to the very, very best. And if we can help our youth players tolerate the demands of the game and teach them these movements, well, then we're really doing everything that we can to develop the player as much as we can then. So I think the videos paint the picture perfect, and it's I think we've pretty much summed up the why very, very quickly, and I think we can very easily move into the what now of what this multi-directional is all contains.
Lads, first question of the night from Aisling. Can this type of directional movement be taught to our youth players?
Yeah, definitely it can, and that's what we're hoping to get across this evening, that we can actually train this once we know how. So it's basically giving our youth players the for want of a different expression, the tools in the toolbox, and that when they find themselves in these environments, that they can open the toolbox very, very quickly, cognitively pick the tool that they need, and then they can perform that movement that creates that space. That's that Kevin Moore and sidestep there, Dave. We were watching it earlier on, and I think we watched it maybe 10 times. Like, it's just the movement, lateral shift, decelerating, and then he accelerated out. But we can totally teach this,
Yeah, 100%. And just on that, specifically for youth, we're not essentially going to train these exact movements. We might combine some smaller movements and some more refined movements, but it's the specific side steps, the crossover steps, the turns that we're actually going to teach, so that the player, as you said, Mix, can add them to their toolbox and apply them where they see fit in the game.
Yeah, perfect.
Happy to move on?
Yeah, I think that's the why, guys.
Yeah, so I suppose next that brings us to just what we're actually going to try and coach. And Ashton, to refer back to your question, this will probably cover a lot of that. So if you want to flick on there, Paul, we'll just delve a bit deeper into what actually is change of direction and agility.
We have another question here, lads, from Amanda. Some players are flat-footed. Do you think this can reduce the ability of their agility for the youth player?
So flat-footed, what would you really mean by that, Amanda? If you can throw it into the chat box.
Yeah, we'll come back to it. We'll bounce on, and if she comes back to me, I'll add to the question. Okay.
Yeah, no worries. So essentially, you just give me a shout, Paul, whenever anything else pops in.
Yeah.
Agility and change of direction, guys. I think we need to just focus on them as, for the moment, for two separate things. Okay, so agility, defined by Young and colleagues, is a rapid whole body movement with a change of velocity or direction in response to a stimulus. Okay, so key one there is response to a stimulus. Okay, Clark et al. Then defines change of direction as the ability to effectively change speed and direction. So as you'll see there, the stimulus aspect is left out. And then Ian Jeffries in 2016 just kind of ties them in together in terms of a game demands. He says effective agility blends perceptual and decision-making components with the ability to apply effective movement. So that kind of just brings them both together, explaining that although they might be separate things and one might be different from the other, in a game we incorporate both and they feed into each other.
Yeah, I think Jeffries just really sums it up there with his definition on it. So it's really, really good the way he just brings it all together on his definition there. Really, really nice.
So if we go a bit more in depth, guys, into agility, specifically in invasion sports, if you look towards the left, there's three components. So towards the left, there's the cognitive, and that'd be our reactive and decision-making aspect. That'd be kind of trained towards our small-sided games and our more game scenarios. Okay, so where we're going to apply our movements and how we're going to apply them based on our surroundings and our environment. Our physical, then, these would be sort of the force capabilities and the actual ingredients that go into the technical movements. Where we're going to train them is going to be on the pitch through the likes of plyometrics, jumps, and in the gym. And then we have our technical on the right, which is going to be what we're going to focus on primarily for the focus of this presentation. And that's essentially the movements and the positions we want to get in. Okay, so again, at the level we're going to coach at youth GAA level, they are open to being able to mold themselves into specific movement scenarios. Okay, so we need to be able to teach those positions so that they become capable to apply them when they're in their small-sided games.
And it also just highlights the importance of having our youth players engaged and actively involved in a well-balanced athletic development program. So as we were saying about the injury risk, it's like the physical components of athletic development, so the strength, the power, reactive strength. It's to give the players the physical capacity to perform these movements effectively and safely is from the physical side of things. Then.
Yeah, 100%.
Lads, Amanda came back to me. So what she's added to, I suppose, heavy-footed players, it's got to do with their arches and feet. I think I have one or two players who are flat-footed, and there's a difference in their ability to change direction at pace. So I suppose feeding from this slide, is there any areas that would probably be of relevance to this player?
Okay, so essentially, if they're flat-footed, what we want to try and do is going to make them more light on their feet. Okay, so we could try and increase their force production capabilities and how quick they can produce that force. How we're going to do that then would be through the likes of plyometric jumps. Okay, so if someone, they're very heavy on their feet and they're very flat-footed and they're always caught on their feet, we want to try and teach them and train them and coach them to try and be more on their toes and more reactive. So to do that, we're going to be, applying a lot of plyometric training and increasing their rate of force development.
And probably to add to that, Dave, just follow on, it's probably, if we actually looked at it, they're probably technically deficient in these movements that we're going to talk about this evening as well. So it actually might just be poor technique, where they might be braking when they're supposed to be accelerating and the likes of that, due to technique as opposed to physical deficiency or something like that. There's a lot of value to be got out of these out of this discussion this evening for those type of players who might just be a bit technically clumsy as opposed to anything else.
Yeah, and it comes down to their coordination, really. And you'll see there under technical, body lean and posture is a main component there. And it's just about controlling their whole body, feet placement, being in control of where they are in space so that they're in a position to actually move in the right way.
Yeah.
Okay, happy enough?
Yeah. So I guess breaking down agility, guys, this is kind of more so towards the cognitive aspect. And if I get you to look at the photo on the right, first of all, you see Padraig Nash, who's a very quick and agile player, essentially taking a sidestep. And I've marked Padraig Nash in a game, and let me tell you, this is at fast pace. So what's going on essentially in his head? Ian Jeffries breaks this down into what he calls the OODA loop. First one is observation. So the athlete observes all relevant information from the stimulus. So in this case, the stimulus is the opposing player through visual, auditory, and physical senses. So this is all happening very quick. He's looking, he's hearing, he's feeling, and he's then moving into orientation, where he's going to essentially organize his thoughts based on the scenario. Okay, he's going to have a list of things he could possibly do, and he's going to organize them into the most suitable. Okay, and this is happening at high speed. He's then going to decide what the optimal course of action is. Okay, so in this case, it looks like he chose a lateral cut. All right, so he's pressing off the outside leg, and then finally he's going to execute the chosen movement. So what Ian Jeffries references there is that it's a constant loop, and it's constantly happening in the brain during a game.
Yeah, I just think when we look at the youth player, going back on the tools to add to the toolbox, so the technical side of things, the more technical tools that we can give to players and the more options we can give to players comes into the action. Then the decision that they make, if we have them multiple abilities to perform multiple movements from teaching technique, then obviously then they've got more options. They can decide on more options, and they've more options to act out of then as well. So the OODA loop then is obviously highly cognitive, but then it's obviously underpinned by the technical capability of the player to actually perform the movement, the action part of it then.
And then it's probably the experience as well. So the experience of every time he's played a game, he's side-footed, or he's sidestepped a player, a small-sided game, a drill, an activity. These all add an experience of the nuance of where he places the weight in his foot, when he throws the hips one direction, where he shows his eyes, where he shows the ball. These are all actions and experiences that every time he does it, he's going to get better at it the next time, again and again and again, and it comes second nature to him. And I'd second that about Padraig. He's exceptionally good at this sort of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I fell victim to that step a few times myself.
So yeah, just when we have a little look at this, we finished off last week's presentation with the quote of the goal is to keep the goal. So obviously, if you look around the edges of this, the aim of defense to attack is to accelerate rapidly into space. And the aim of attacking is the ability to create and find space. And the aim of attack to defense is the ability to close space and recover a defensive position. And then the aim of defending is to close space and ultimately win the ball, win possession of the ball. So all of these phases of play and these areas of the game are underpinned by physical capacities. And obviously tonight's focus is on multi-directional speed. So in the center of this graph here, we can see change of direction. So we've got deceleration, we've got shuffling, we've got the crossover step, the open step, and then we've got cutting as well. So these are going to be the key movements that we're going to dive into now for the remaining of the presentation. But just trying to relate you back to the game, that these movements form part of the game in all these different phases of play. So we might be going into the technical aspect of it here now, but we as a group are very much along the lines of the goal is to keep the goal to goal, and that is to produce and develop players who can effectively create space, scoring opportunities, and then obviously stop scoring opportunities down the other end.
Yeah, and one thing I just add there is obviously we're going to go into the technical models here, but as we're going through, maybe just in your own head, think of a scenario where a player might apply them, so you can kind of understand, you know, the scenarios where they might be used and you might actually apply them more.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I suppose the very first one is deceleration. Okay, as I said at the start, it's massive. You know, the force you go through in your legs and your whole body essentially is greater than 50% of an acceleration. So it's the highest, most force we go through voluntarily in a game. Every change of direction contains a deceleration. Okay, so no matter what speed we're running at, we'll have to decelerate into it, and there's principles we need to follow to do that. Okay. Decelerating plays an important role in creating space between attackers and defenders, and we'll see that in the video on the right. Yeah, elite athletes are more capable of maintaining a higher frequency of accelerations and decelerations than lower performing players. And I think that's a key point there actually in relation to injury prevention, because as we've seen from a lot of the studies that went past, that a lot of injuries happen during these high force decelerations. So if we can train athletes, our younger athletes, to be able to go through these decelerations at a higher frequency, they're less exposed to injury risk.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. We just have a video here just to showcase perfect example of the importance of deceleration. So hopefully it's playing for you guys now.
So essentially, guys, the quicker we become at decelerating, the more options we have sooner. Okay, if we decelerate slowly, it's going to take us more time, it's more labored, and we're probably going to be put under pressure whether we have the ball or without. But if we can decelerate quicker, we're going to be away from our opponent, and we're going to have more options and have more of a time to decide what we want to do as our next action.
Yeah.
Happy to move on, lads.
Yeah.
Yeah, the clip is fairly straightforward, guys. As you'll see, it was just a straight run followed by a deceleration and then nearly a cut back in, and there's your space, and it leads to a goal. So the importance of decelerating quickly, just highlighted there.
Yeah, dead on. Guys, just a heads up, a little bit of a warning. The next 3, 4, 5 slides are technical models for the movements that we're going to be recommending you integrate into your trainings. We've videos on the YouTube page again for all of these movements. So if it's all a bit, whoa, there's a lot to take on there tonight, we are providing the resources that you can dip back in and nearly take one in isolation and get your head around it and move on to the next. So there is 5 or 6 different moves that we're going to be showing there the next 4 or 5 slides. Take on what you can, but don't get too stressed if you're like, geez, that was just too much for me. The lads will explain what we're talking about, but just to reinforce, we're going to have, again, we'll send out all the slides and we'll have all the videos up on YouTube so you can dip in and out at your own pace as well. Okay?
Yeah, so go ahead there, Mick.
Yeah, no, so obviously when we have a little look at deceleration and the images in front of us, the image in the top left corner, as we can see, that the player's right leg is producing that braking force. After that, then the center of mass is lowered, as you can see, and then the player finds himself into an athletic stance, so the bilateral stance at the end of the deceleration. So as we can see, there's a big force. So as Dave has alluded to, if you really look at that top left picture, you can see the force being generated through the legs coming through, and then the center of mass is lower down. So that's the deceleration into an athletic stance. So they're obviously coming in from an acceleration at pace, and then there's big forces being applied to slow the body down, to readjust into an athletic stance, which could provide opportunities to perform any sort of movements on the pitch, laterally and defensive areas, and the options are open. And then also then in deceleration, we also have accelerating to a split stance. So Dave, do you want to talk through the split stance?
Yeah, guys, just on the athletic stance, guys, a scenario you might apply that in is say in the picture there, that's the cornerback chasing a forward out, slamming on the brakes because the forward gets the ball and essentially shepherding the forward into a closed space. So just a bit of a scenario where we might apply that into the deceleration into a sprint stance. So a lot the same. Okay, we have in the first picture on the bottom left, there's braking going on through the athlete's right leg. It's in front of the center of mass. The base of support is spread. Essentially then in the second and third pictures, the center of mass is lowered. The posture is good. We increase the amount of steps to try and slow ourselves down, and then we're into our split stance. So you'll notice the difference between the top right and the bottom right here. So essentially in a bilateral stance or a square on stance in the top, and then in the split stance, which we can relate back to a scenario which we would have covered and the lads would have covered last week. That's essentially our position we want to start and accelerate on from. So a scenario you want to, apply this to would be if you accelerate out, decelerate, you find yourself, you have the ball, and essentially you have a split stance and you want to accelerate forward and into space.
Yeah.
And guys, just so you understand, these are taken from the video clip. So we just scroll through the video and we try to find the different positions in the actual video. So these are just stills taken from the actual YouTube clips, as opposed to us posing in these positions or anything like that. We move on.
Yeah, on to the next one. Yeah.
Lovely. So the lateral shuffle, guys, essentially what we mentioned above in the deceleration into the athletic stance, this might be a next movement you might go through. So essentially in the first picture, it's a square on stance with a wide base of support. Into the second one, driving the right leg to extend the hip out, keeping posture good, eyes up, head up, looking forward. And then a quick transition with the feet and back into the athletic stance. All right, so our position isn't disrupted much, but we've covered a good bit of ground there.
Yeah, and just as we look at this movement here, when we're coaching it, we want to just be having a little look in picture number 2 on the left leg. You can see that the knee is staying aligned over the foot so that we're not going into bringing the knee out of alignment with the foot. So we're trying to keep that nice, strong base of support. And then the quick transition in image number 3, like this, you see the 2 feet up in the air quite close together. This happens in a split second, and it's across back into that athletic stance again. So as you can see throughout the whole movement, the hips stay low, the center of mass stays low, and we're nice and strong all the way across the movement. But we are looking for certain teaching points along the way. That drive from the outside leg in point in number 2, and then the knee staying in alignment as well is also something for us just to be watching.
And again, guys, where we might apply this would be straight following on from the decel with the cornerback shepherding the forward out towards the sideline or whatever.
Happy to move on?
Yeah. So just on the crossover step, guys, it obviously, first of all, when you look at these images, it might look a little bit unorthodox to GAA and what we're suggesting to include these in, but from this movement here, we can actually cover a massive amount of ground in comparison with the shuffle. So if we start off in the athletic stance on picture number 1, okay, if you look down in picture number 2, if you look down at the player's right foot, you can see that it's just starting to swivel, open, turn out. And then the left, and number 3 then, the left hip brings the knee up through in front of the body. And then we come across in number 4, we plant, and then the right leg comes back around again into that athletic stance. So as Dave has been saying, how we can apply these to situation, to games, and when we would use these is if the player is in a situation on the pitch where he or she is trying to get across and close some space, if they go from this position of athletic stance to athletic stance, when they get to the second phase, they're still in a position to move laterally to the front or to the back. So this position gives all the options open, and it can cover a lot of ground in comparison to the lateral shuffle. So that would be my take on the crossover step, Dave. Have you anything on that?
Yeah, no, just in a scenario, you've hit the nail on the head on where it might be used. And we covered the decel into the lateral shuffle, and that might be, a small shepherd of the defender, shepherding the forward out of play. In this one, the defender might not be in a good position. He might have got turned and might want to cover ground quick, as you said, Mick. So it's a bit more of a high velocity, and you're trying to cover more ground when you use the crossover. You might be chasing back the attacker who's after catching the ball, who's attempted to try and turn you, let's say.
Yeah, so just if you look at number 3 there, if when you're initiating the movement, if you're fully committed to your chest facing facing the way we're moving, and then all of a sudden the break of play happens the direction you've just came from, you're going to be able to get back into the play from that athletic stance easier than you will be if you're committed to going that direction.
Yeah, and I just referenced the athlete in the photo, the left leg. So look at the distance from, say, picture 1 to picture 4, how much ground they've covered. Like, the left foot is essentially on the cone in the first one, and it's not even in the photo then on the fourth one. So it's one where you cover massive ground quickly.
Happy, boys?
Yeah, okay, Paul, yeah.
So again, another crossover, guys, but at a bit of a sharper angle. This just depends on, and the sharper the angle, essentially, the lower the center of mass has to go. So if you look at the first one, slamming on the brakes again, lowering the center of mass. The second one, the center of mass is much lower than we would have seen before. And then the base of support is very wide. Into a turn of the torso and the hips and the shin into the direction we want to go. Then you see our crossover step coming through with the left, and then a big knee drive to open up into the stride, into our acceleration mechanics. So again, if you were a defender and a forward caught the ball out in front of you and went to turn back into goal, this is the position the defender might go through, and this is the one we need to teach them to apply in that situation.
Yeah, and as you can see on image number 5, it really connects from what we were discussing last week in the acceleration. So you can see number 5, the athlete has been completely turned the direction that they're going effectively by using the crossover step, and then they've got themselves into an accelerative position that they can obviously get out of that position then much quicker. So as you can see, we're linking acceleration into this, so it's all part of the picture together.
Yeah, happy to move on, Paul. Just a small bit different on this one, guys. You'll see the main difference in comparison with the crossover is the right leg doesn't. The right leg is the one we're pressing down with straight away. Okay, so you'll see the left leg doesn't cross the midline or the center, or the line going through the middle of the athlete's body. So it's essentially a press down with the right leg this time, and that's our initial step to get out of this turn. And this is just the open step. It's just a different technique that we also need to cover.
Yeah.
So similar principles apply. Braking force, lowering the center of mass, posture and arm swings aid the process. And then we're turning our hips in the direction we want to go and getting into our acceleration mechanics from then on.
And like you might be looking, and sorry, just if you look at the open and the crossover, we were discussing during the week, all 4 of us, and we're kind of saying, why have one, and why, like, which one are we going to use? And it's up to the player to decide. So we're kind of going back to that OODA loop, the cognitive element of this whole area of strength and conditioning, that if we give the players the mechanics to actually use the open step, or we give them the mechanics of using the crossover step, then when they come to the decision part of the OODA loop, in relation to, they have multiple tools that they can use, and it's up to them which one they use, because ultimately whatever step that they use, if it achieves them getting to the ball quicker or closing down space effectively, well, then that was the correct step that they take. And we just have to continually give our players, especially our youth players, give them all these options that they can explore with in the game.
Yeah, guys, and just to reinforce, we've given you a lot of technical feedback and decision and pointers and stuff across various moves here. Really, what we're trying to do, I was trying to paint the picture that each of these is a skill that you can learn. Similar to a player can still play a match if he can't hook kick a football, but he can punt kick or any various other kicks outside the foot kick. So it's not going to limit him playing the game by not having these skills perfected, but it's going to increase his ability if he has more tools in the toolbox, as the lads are saying. And what we're proving is, yes, you mightn't in 3 or 4 matches, you mightn't get an opportunity to do a 180 cut. So running at a direct hard line, hitting the line and turning back on yourself. But by understanding how you do this move, there's a big trickle-on effect to the rest of your game, that you're more efficient at other moves, kind of less demanding moves. So it's kind of that element of, can we kind of ingrain, or can we build in a really good pattern, and from that then the player, it mightn't occur directly in this situation in the match because of all the other demands of tracking a man and other stresses, but more of it's going to stay in the game for the player than if he doesn't know what he's doing and he's only been exposed to the stress of the game all the time.
Yeah, like I think just on that point as well, Paul, I think the video that we showed last week and this week, the Jamie Barron clip, if you look at the Waterford player who receives the ball initially, like, he receives that ball in his own half, and his footwork, his lateral movement, his ability to decelerate and accelerate out of a very tight space, so his change of direction capabilities created that goal from his own half. If the clip didn't play properly for you, just YouTube Jamie Barron on it, and you'll see the clip being played out. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, and just on that, Paul, you mentioned slightly, you mentioned about ingraining these movement patterns so they'll have a trickle-on effect. And I'd refer back to the question about the player being flat-footed. I think it was Amanda, forgive me if I'm wrong there, but it's just about, again, ingraining and greasing these grooves for the athletes so that, when they can apply certain movements, that they're ready for it when they come around.
Yeah, definitely agree. Okay, we'll roll on. The how.
Yeah. So we've covered, guys, the why. The why is fairly straightforward. You've all watched our games. You understand why agility and the ability to change direction is important. We've covered what exactly they are. We went through a lot there, and again, there's more on the YouTube channel. We're going to get a bit more practical now and give you hopefully some takeaways on how you might apply this in your training. So if we look at the image on your screen in front of you, it's essentially an arrow format. Okay, so on the left we have a box. In that box is develop typical movements. Okay, so at a base level we need to try and establish a movement baseline or a movement foundation so that we can apply it in any situation to our sport. Okay, moving on through that process, then the next box is use the typical distances and directions. Okay, so this applies to when we're training these movements. So for example, the example I'd use would be a lateral shuffle, for example. Okay, so the baseline movement is just a short shuffle across. Then we're going to look at how we're going to apply that in the game. So we're going to apply it in a closed context to the distance you might cover in a lateral shuffle in a game. All right, so it's a bit more applicable. Okay, then the next box across towards the right, add the typical movement combinations. So again, it might be a deceleration followed by a lateral shuffle followed by a 45-degree turn into an acceleration. So you're trying to essentially layer up the movements and apply them more specific to what what's going to happen in a game. Okay, then essentially it's all a closed environment up until then. Then you're going to get up and add key perceptual triggers. Okay, so what this relates to is we go back to the OODA loop and what's going on in the cognitive aspect of agility, and that's going to be, you know, opponents. It's going to be noise. It's going to be somebody pushing you. So we're adding these sense aspects in there and trying to apply them with these into the situation. So we know when to apply them in game when these situations and scenarios do occur. And then essentially at the end we're going to add our key sports skills. So that'll be, you know, doing it with a ball. So it might be sprinting out, decel, you know, lateral shuffle, tackle, receive a ball, and accelerate out. And that's just essentially the full process of where we need to go through when coaching these movements.
Yeah, and then that brings us up then as well, is, as you can see in the top right corner, in small-sided games, it's how we use small-sided games to promote opportunities for the players to practice these movement skills that we've ingrained and we've developed. So it's as you can see in the text, it's the use of the pitch. So it must be small enough to promote evasive movements. And if we want to expose the players to these movement patterns that we've developed in a closed environment, the small-sided games is the perfect opportunity to exactly what we keep on relating to, keeping the goal the goal. We want to put the players back into the natural environment of our games with the movements that we've developed. And then we hope that we've developed over a progressive period of time that the players are able to open their toolbox and actually use these in small-sided games. But it's important that we use the small-sided game area correctly. Like as it says in the text here, if the pitch is too big, well, then we're not going to create as many opportunities for sidestep, shuffling, and cuts, 180 turns, different degree of turns. So when we think of small-sided games, if we can just start just thinking a little bit differently about them as opposed to just 4 cones and just going for it, let's just think about what space I use here and what it's going to promote. If I'm looking to work on change of direction this particular training evening, can I tailor my small-sided game to achieve that goal?
Yeah, definitely, Mick. And I think a key thing to understand as well is the arrow phase is very much about planned learning. So we're laying it out in front of them so then to fulfill the task at hand. Whereas the small-sided game, the opportunities to perform these tasks arise as the situation demands. So we're not actually encouraging them to do cuts or decels or accels. It's just play the game, play to the game, the rules of the game that you have, win the game if they can. And these are going to be an accidental byproduct or a intentional byproduct probably by the coach, but the players won't be doing it on purpose. They'll just be responding, going back into the cognitive OODA loop part of the process. So it's kind of they decide what they want to do as opposed to us telling them you should cut there or you should run there or whatever.
Yeah, 100%. Okay.
Yeah,
so guys, just in front of you here, you'll see a load of arrows, essentially. Each one of the blue boxes on the left, or the blue arrows on the left, contains the movements that we've sort of singled out as the most important. So you have our shuffle, our crossover, the open step, the acceleration and deceleration, and the cut, okay? And if I get you to draw your attention up to the arrow at the very top, that's the progression we're going to go through when coaching these movements. Okay, so we're going to go from a closed, very strict on just the movement, absolutely no reactive element. Then once they nail the movement, then they're going to try and do it with a bit of a reactive component. So a bit more of a cognitive component, but it's still going to be controlled. Okay, so we're going to control the reactive component. Then it's going to be done completely open. Okay, so the reactive component is a bit more varied. And then we're going to try and apply it to the game. So, for example, if we use our shuffle, for example, we're going to do a resisted lateral shuffle. that's focus. The focus of that exercise or that drill is to essentially get the athlete to drill those positions we want them in. Okay. Then we're going to go to a lateral shuffle. Okay. So again, referring back to the other arrow, we're going to add the specific distance we want them to cover in a game. Then we might move on to something reactive. Okay. So for example, they're jogging straight, and when we blow the whistle, they have to decelerate and go into a lateral shuffle. Okay. And then we might even add that into an open game where it might be a mirror drill where we face two athletes off face to face, and one has to react to the other's movement inside a box and essentially follow the other athlete.
Yeah, and then just progressing on them fun games there as well, like the one at the very end, Bulldog. It's something that we've all used with our players going from right the way up their development. It's if you actually play it the next time we get out training again, if you actually play it with the players, and if you actually just take the opportunity to stand back and observe what's happening in the game of Bulldog, it's unbelievable to see all these movements. And as Paul said, in relation to the small-sided games, we're not telling our players to use a cut or use this, that, or the other. You'll just see it happening. You'll see it happening in front of you through these games. So it's something that we've all been using and something that our players enjoy, and it's highly effective in developing the areas that we're looking at.
Yeah,
lads, we've a couple of questions. No, go on, finish, Dave. I'll hit you with the questions afterwards. Finish.
Yeah, I just stressed out that can look very confusing to a lot of people, and I just stressed that's essentially a menu for the coach, and you're going to pull from where you see fit. So you're not going to essentially cover everything there. You might combine a couple of them and apply them to a couple of games where you see fit. But yeah, go ahead.
Okay, first question. So for a 6v6 small-sided game, going back to the last slide, do you have any recommendations on pitch size to encourage the movements we want, change of direction movements?
Well, yeah, if you were looking to work on the change of direction, you want to be keeping it small. So you'd be looking at maybe 20 meters by 20 meters or 15 by 15. It keeps the pitch size quite small. Therefore, there's quick release of the ball. There's lots of movement. It's short. It's snappy, and there's not much space for the players to open up into big strides. It's all very, as you can see it back into that video. It's in the Waterford player was in very, very close area, and he was able to perform the lateral movements to get himself out of space. So it's important that if we're looking to work on that element, that we keep the pitch size relatively small. I'm not saying tiny, but relatively small, that can promote opportunities for the players to perform these skills. Again, we're coaching GAA. We're not coaching a change of direction in these games and in these scenarios.
Yeah, I think that's a key point there, Mick, that, if we wanted these scenarios to occur, we'd make the pitch as small as we can. But that's not the focus. So essentially, we want them to occur, but we don't want them to be the only focus. We want decision-making, tactical aspects to come into our small-sided games. So you mentioned 20 by 20. I'd probably go a small bit more than that. I would say 6v6, and open it up a small bit, depending on what you're working on tactically. But if you want to strictly work on these things, you want to keep it tight-knit.
Yeah. I use 10 meters squared per two lads marking each other. So that'd be 60 meters squared. So that might be 20 meters by 30 meters, and then you play around with it, like you said there, Dave. If we're looking for the kicking emphasis, if it's football, we probably might need to stretch it out a little bit longer. And then the other one we need to think about is we probably need a dead zone in a hurling situation, because we always want to encourage the chance to strike long. Particularly in Kildare, it's a key aspect that managers are transferring games from football directly over to hurling, and they work really well from change of direction, tackling, ball control. But what we're probably not developing, and it's a key aspect of the match in hurling, is the long strike. So that's where I set up nearly a no man's land. So you have your activity occurring in one box, and then there's another zone where there's more players, and the ball is struck from zone 1 into zone 2, and then the activity occurs. And that kind of gives us time on, time off as well, and it kind of replicates the demands of the game as well, which we'll be talking about next week in relation to conditioning. So there's a few things to play around with there. We've a couple of papers on that. There was a couple of studies done from down in UL there last year, depending on the size of the match, the physical demands it elicits. So I'll send them out in the email after this as well. So good answer there in small sided games. The next question would be, what is the resistance? What is the resistant element for the movements that we've referenced?
Yeah, so what we do here is, if we're looking to have access to them, we'd essentially use a band. Okay, so we'd use the 10 centimeter resistance band, and we essentially tie it around the waist, which is going to be where our center of mass is going to be located. And we'd have another, say, a partner just holding it and add a slight bit of resistance so that the player's getting into that position, but the position isn't disrupted. Okay, so essentially a band around the waist, walking with the player who's resistant, who's doing the lateral shuffle. And you'll see that if you know, there's links to the YouTube at the end. These exercises are shown on that. There's examples given.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it kind of greases it grooves the motor pattern. Actually, by resisting the exercise, we're actually slowing it down, and so we're actually giving the players more opportunity to learn the motor pattern by using the resistance element of it.
Yeah, I suppose you've explained it there, Mick, because that'd be a key thing when people think resistance, they think of making it harder. So you've explained it there, how you're actually making it more achievable or easy to learn by adding a little bit of resistance. Good stuff. Do you have anything to add on this slide here? You happy enough?
Yeah, no, I think it's just key to kind of understand, like, the most important thing is that nearly the top arrow and all the individual exercises and movements are you know, progressed at their own rate and based on the environment the coach sees. Okay, so this isn't a prescription, it's more of a menu or an example of how to apply these kind of theories.
You happy, Mick? Yeah?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, probably the only one I'll add is play around with the combinations, lads. So, Joe, try figure out stuff that kind of happens in a match, or stuff that it mightn't happen in a match, but the exact kind of run or play won't happen in the match. It's not like NFL where you run 5 meters this way and you cut 2 meters that way and stuff like that. But more so think about, if I make them accelerate for 5 meters into shuffle, well, that's actually going to give them a really good chance to decelerate and then quickly turn it into a shuffle. So messing around with them combinations and trying to figure out what works well, what challenges the players, what engages the players and makes it kind of mentally challenging is good as well. So it's kind of mess around with them combinations as well. But I suppose myself and Mick had a chat as well today. Don't progress them too quick. So that 180 cut, that could be quite challenging to the players. So maybe tip along through the rest of them, and then when you think that they're getting good at them and they're good at the crossover and good at the open step, then you can possibly integrate the 180 cut there. Okay, we'll move on.
Yeah, and guys, just to follow up on that training menu you would have seen there, all the examples are on the YouTube channel that Paul, myself, and Mick have created there. And you'll see, albeit it's our attempt at the best technique, but it's not perfect, but it's examples of where you might apply them. So you have that there as a reference going forward.
We've good stuff, yeah. I might actually just give you a view of a click on it and see if this works for us. It is. Can you still see that, lads?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so if it's not playing for you again, don't worry about it. I'm just giving everyone an oversight. So what we have here is our whole menu of activities running right through to last week where we did accelerations, decelerations. So you're going to find all this after this evening's session. So it's called GAA Athletic Development. And what you can find there is each of the videos we did. So if I click on one, we'll see if it works. Crossover base to reactive. So what we had there is that the player is reacting to a left-right call with a crossover movement trying to get into place. So that mightn't happen in a match, but all we're trying to do there is groove the pattern of the crossover. So the left leg coming across the right knee, getting into place, base position as quick as possible. So that would be the activity there. So there's plenty of them there. I just said to see if it works so lads can see what's happening. I'll try pull up the slideshow again. Okay. Lads, we've one more question there. From Matty, because you players have not been playing Gaelic games over the last few months, their exposure to change of direction may be limited. Is there an initial approach coaches should consider when incorporating agility-based work so they don't increase the risk of injury?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing we need to look at when the players come back is we need to give them the opportunity to get back playing our games again. And we need to build a little bit of general fitness back up with the players. And we can just use simply our general small-sided games without any major specific focus on agility and change of direction in isolation, so to speak. So we can give the players that exposure to recommencing training, recommencing the load being placed by our games for the initial block, be it 4 to 6 to 8 weeks, coming back in. And then after that, then once we've established that basic general fitness back into our games again, then we could progressively start introducing this. So like a lot of the youth players might not have been exposed to these elements that we're discussing this evening, but we're not saying for 2 seconds that the minute we get back training, you're going back out doing 180 turns, anything like that. What I would be advising is to get the players back out onto the pitch and just build up that general movement capacities of our players. In our small-sided games, in our normal trainings, we're going to be slowly getting ligaments and tendons accustomed to the load that is being imposed on them after the break. It's actually funny that question came up. It's something we were discussing on our last on the last webinar of this series. We're going to have a return to play section in that as well. So have you got anything to add to that, Dave, or a different slant on it, or what do you think?
No, 100%. You absolutely nailed it there, Mick. Like, essentially just get them back playing their sport first off. That's what they're going to have to be doing at the highest intensity. From then, as coaches, we can layer in at slow paces what we feel like they need to work on. So again, where you might pull in a 45-degree cut to just kind of drill those things that you feel they might not be getting, all right? But just make sure they're starting at a low intensity and they're layering up intensity as they go, all right? I'd probably assume a lot of players would have done nothing. So I'd probably start at a very low level in terms of intensity and load, and just essentially layer up every week until competition.
Yeah, I think even going on last week's presentation on speed and then also this week now on the change of direction, I think the main thing we're trying to get across to youth coaches is this stuff that we're discussing, it's all very progressive. It's not go out on the first week or two and absolutely overload the players with this stuff because they wouldn't have had this exposure before. So it's a youth athletic development. So if we're under 14, under 15 team, we're just slowly building this stuff into their trainings. We're not going straight out and throwing the kitchen sink at them straight away. You need to be patient and take that slow, progressive manner. What about yourself, Paul? Have you got a slant on that?
Yeah, I'd probably come in a different slant, lads. You look at this table, it's fairly like from shuffle down to open step, at least fair enough. We'd want to mind accels and decels and make sure that they're implemented in a very gradual schedule. But like if session 1, if we want to start back and introduce a resisted lateral shuffle, there'd be no issues there, so it's kind of a lot of this is low intensity and grooving patterns. We're very conscious that actually we're taking a lot of the stresses away, so we're taking the other stresses of players tackling you, of any of the other activities away, so they're actually getting to develop these in a true state and make them good, so going resisted lateral shuffle into a lateral shuffle and maybe a bit of a game like you call left and they have to go right or something like that. It's all going to be very simple, basic stuff. Fair enough, don't go into the combinations of an accel into a decel into a shuffle, but maybe the first phase, that closed and reactive, is perfect right from the get-go,
I guess this is where myself and yourself, Paul, I'm always get the ball involved.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a key part of this webinar series for me, that I'm just trying to show all our coaches that are logging onto this that these are all skills that can be built, okay? And sometimes when we're just 100% focused on the ball always being in the game, they're not, okay? Whereas if we're able to dedicate a small microdose of every session, that we just give a little taste of this, we're going to actually build a player who's ready for senior, club and inter-county by the time they get to the age. Whereas if we just keep giving them the exam and say, go play the match, let the match develop you, well, there's going to be some aspects that they just won't get fully developed on. Like, so it's just a different thinking on things as well. Right, who's running through a session plan? This probably feeds into it as well, to be honest.
Yeah, this kind of covers where you kind of go with it and how practically you might go with it. So if you look at, guys, this you would have got a lot of information would have been kind of spit at you there now in the last hour or so. But how you might comprise this into your session is probably the most important bit for you guys. If you look at the left, you have the phase of your session. Then coming across, you have the focus, the content, and then finally the duration. So what the research says, and what the likes of Ian Jeffries, who's a leading researcher in this area, the warm-up should contain a lot of this multi-directional movement. They'll say, okay, so you're encouraging a lot of these patterns during your warm-up. And you'll find in the GAA 15, a lot of this is happening with your lateral lunge, your jumps and stuff, okay? So these type movements and kinetic chaining is happening during the warm-up, all right? Then you're going into your change of direction focus, all right? So this is where intensity might be brought up a small bit more. It's going to be, again, starting with closed drills, moving towards open and reactive. The example we've used is the lateral shuffle. So you might start with your resisted lateral shuffle, 2 by 5 meters each. And then you might go lateral shuffle without the resistance, so a bit more velocity, into a lateral shuffle with an acceleration, for an example of a combination into a more specific movement. And then you might go from a 45-degree cut over 30 meters, and then you're straight then into your main session. So that's the progression we ideally like to go through. Again, during the main session, you're probably going to have a small-sided game or a game scenario. So there's where you're going to layer on your key sports skills, as the arrow above would have shown.
Yeah, and just one thing there, Dave, I'd probably be saying that we'd probably create the cut early in the run. So we'd probably get them maybe 10 meters out where the cut occurs, and then they'd excel for the 20 meters. So they might excel in 10 meters, decel into the cut, and then excel out for 20 meters. We don't need to wait to get 30 meters into the run and they're getting very high intensities and then slamming on the brakes into a cut. That could be an advancement at some stage, that we keep pushing the cut distance out. But and that'd be another thing just to be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely.
We had a couple more questions here, lads. Where on the physical development continuum do you suggest agility is? Would you need to have done a block of linear max speed work first? As the load is so high when changing direction, should we challenge players by asking players to change direction after 30-40 meters run so they can reach max speed to overload them, so they adapt to these forces, or would that expose players to an increased injury risk? There's a mouthful there.
Yeah, so there's a bit in that there. So if you break it down, essentially, I think the question first off said, do we expose them to, our linear speed work? I think that was it, Paul. You might correct me there if I'm wrong, but do we do that before this stuff, because the load of this stuff is very high? And where I'd come from at that is, yes, you would do it as a precursor, but it's also an ingredient to this stuff. So the low level stuff here isn't going to have massive load. Like Paul mentioned with a resisted lateral shuffle, the load on that isn't massive. All right. So we're still, going through the motor patterns and without them massive impacts or massive deceleration forces. Okay. So I'd start essentially really closed, eventually moving into some, more open drills, and I'd layer up the speed stuff with it. All right. So again, the speed stuff is an ingredient to a lot of change of direction. So you have accels, decels, high velocity runs in our game, and you're going to need to change direction in them. So I'd start low and build them in together as we progress on.
Yeah, and I just on that as well. It's I don't think we'd be suggesting to be imposing these movements on a fatigued player when they're fatigued in order to replicate like that. That exposure is going to occur naturally in the games. But when we're working on it in isolation in our training blocks, that we're not exposing the players to these movements in a fatigued state, is something that we need to watch as well. Just to add on to your point, Dave, there, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And it's kind of similar to what our message last week, that we're continually trying to create this little window in training where through isolation of these movements where players can just learn them and figure it out. So like there's a huge technical focus on this. And that key aspect of doing it when the lads are fresh and doing it as a very small snippet so we're not boring the lads or we're not taking over from the game. And then using the game and the small side of games and the focus of your session. So if you have a game coming up and you need to work on transition play from defense to forward play, that should still be the key bulk of your session as opposed to worrying about all this physical development stuff. There will be a huge amount of this that will occur in the small side of games or in the game training. This is nearly just that, can we microdose this in every session, which is a key aspect. The other question we had there, Mick, is what age would you propose starting this at?
Well, look, without giving a funny answer, and I don't mean to sound funny on this, but
don't do it. Don't do it.
Well, no, I'm not going to do that. It's basically when the players can concentrate on your coaching instructions and they can follow the coaching instructions in the closed environments, and that's when you can start tailoring these specific closed movements, and they're paying attention to you. So generally, we're looking at under 13, 14, right the way up. But when we actually go back into our menu of Paul just slips back a slide there.
Yeah.
And sorry, so if we go in here, the fun games, we were just chatting today about different shuffling games that we play as part of our jobs. We're involved in the primary schools, and we actually play a lot of these games in the primary schools. Obviously, we're not even mentioning change of direction, lateral shuffling. We're not changing direction, center of mass, nothing like this to the players or to the kids, sorry. But we are exposing them through these fun games from a very early age. And then when the players develop cognitively and they mature and they can actually follow instructions, well, then that's when we can start actually coaching them a little bit more in this kind of defined area, so to speak. So that would be my answer on that.
Yeah, that's perfect for me as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we answered your questions, guys. If we missed any part, come back in and I'll follow up with the lads. That's the session plan. And again, I think, as you said there, Dave, that could be built out for any activity. So what we've kind of built in there is primarily the lateral shuffle, but that could be any activity and a combination of any activity. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. That's just an example we use, guys, for the sample. Again, it depends on the stage you're at, the age of the athlete, and what exactly you're trying to achieve. So based on your context, so you can manipulate that as much as you want. We just use the lateral shuffle as a progression there.
Okay, excellent. Okay, I think we hit the how there. Yeah,
I hope so.
Hopefully.
So just finishing up then, thanks for staying with us so far, lads. The boys are just going to give us a summary of what we talked about.
Yeah, so look, basically just to summarise the objectives at the start is we hope that we've got across why we train, change of direction. We've got varied movement patterns on the field. I'm hoping that we explain what it actually is and that we've brought your attention to the fact that agility and change of direction are different skills, and if you just have to just train them as such, they are interchangeable, they're interlinked, but they are different at the same time as well. And then obviously then how to train it. We've just spent the last little while focusing on the change of direction patterns and developing the basic movement skills, and then slowly, as Dave's arrow was saying, just progressing it right the way across. So look, just from myself, thanks again for tuning in. And as Paul has said already, our emails, our phone numbers are out around across all social media platforms, Kildare GAA. And if you ever want to contact with us, just give us a call.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. And I second that, Mick. Firstly, I'd like to say thanks for logging in and listening, guys. It's a Friday evening, so there's probably a number of things you could be doing other than this, but thanks very much. I hope you got something from it. We tried to be as comprehensive as we could with the why, the what, and the how, and applying it to GAA. So again, I hope you got something from it. If you have any more questions, just follow us up. I'll get Paul to email out our email addresses on the follow-up email there. So if you have anything else, just get in contact. And yeah, thanks very much.
Deadly.
Thanks, guys. Good night. Have a good weekend.
Thank you very much, lads. Thank you. Yeah, so just before we wrap up, lads, we're on to conditioning next week. So we're going to look at conditioning specific to the youth athlete in hurling and football, and how we'd implement that. So we hope you can log in next week. I'll get these slides out to us by this evening or probably tomorrow at this stage. And again, if you've any questions, you're unsure about anything, make sure you just come back to me and ask the questions. We're trying to create the content that you need. We're not trying to tell you what to do. Okay, thank you very much. Good night.
Thanks, folks. Have a nice weekend.
Thanks, lads.